I am Travis, 58 years old, a retired construction foreman from Portland. After losing Margaret, my wife of 32 years, to cancer, I discovered something unexpected in her will. A second house I never knew about. My relationship with my only son, Daniel, had already been strained, but I never imagined how much worse it would get after his mother passed. Looking back now, staying silent about that inheritance saved me from a terrible mistake. If you have ever had to face difficult family decisions after losing someone you love, hit that like button and subscribe as I share how keeping one secret protected the last gift my wife left behind. I met Margaret when I was 26, working construction since I was 19, with barely a high school diploma to my name. She was waiting tables at this local diner where I would stop for breakfast before heading to job sites. Every morning, she would remember exactly how I liked my coffee black, with just a touch of sugar. Her smile made those early mornings bearable, especially during those brutal winter projects when the Oregon rain seemed to seep into my bones. It took me 3 months to work up the courage to ask her out. Margaret was smart, studying part-time to become an elementary school teacher. I could not figure out why someone like her would be interested in a guy who came in with mud on his boots most days. But she said yes, and that first date at the county fair turned into weekly dates, which turned into 32 years of marriage. We were never rich by any measure. I worked my way up from basic labor to crew supervisor and eventually construction foreman, while Margaret taught 3rd grade at Pinewood Elementary in one of the poorest districts in Portland. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house that I had spent years fixing up, adding a deck Margaret had always wanted, redoing the kitchen myself when we could finally afford new appliances. It was nothing fancy, but it was ours, paid for with every overtime shift I ever worked. Having children did not come easy for us. We tried for years, suffered through 2 miscarriages that nearly broke Margaret before Daniel came along when I was 40 and Margaret was 38. He was our miracle. From the moment he was born, everything changed. All our dreams, all our plans, everything centered around giving that boy the best life possible. While other construction guys were buying boats or motorcycles, I was picking up extra shifts to start Daniel's college fund. Margaret tutored after school for additional income. We both worked summers when teachers and construction workers typically take time off. Daniel never went without, even when it meant Margaret and I did. When he got accepted to the University of Washington for his undergraduate degree, I took a second job doing weekend security work. When he decided to pursue his MBA afterwards, Margaret started selling handmade jewelry at local craft fairs to help with his expenses. We were so proud of him, this first-generation college graduate who would have opportunities neither of us ever had. What I did not know during those years was that Margaret had developed a small hobby in real estate investment. She was always good with numbers, better than me for sure. I handled our main finances, the mortgage, utilities, insurance, all the regular stuff. But Margaret managed her teacher's pension and apparently had been setting aside small amounts over the years into what she called her special projects fund. I knew she would occasionally mention looking at property listings or attending local auctions, but I figured it was just a pastime like my woodworking in the garage. I never imagined she was actually buying anything. We were too strapped for cash with Daniel's education, or so I thought. 3 years before she died, Margaret was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. The diagnosis came so suddenly, turning our quiet, predictable life upside down overnight. One day she was complaining about bloating and fatigue symptoms we both attributed to approaching 60, and the next day a doctor was showing us scans with masses that should not have been there. The battle was brutal. 3 rounds of chemotherapy, 2 major surgeries, countless nights in hospital rooms, where the fluorescent lights made her already pale skin look almost transparent. Our savings drained quickly, even with insurance. Medical bills piled up faster than autumn leaves in our backyard. I would have sold everything we owned to save her, and nearly did. Throughout it all, Margaret remained the teacher, always thinking of others. She would chat with the nurses about their children, remember details about their lives from one treatment to the next. Even on her worst days, she would insist on sending cards to her former students who were graduating or celebrating birthdays. During her final months, when the treatments stopped working and hospice care began at our home, I often found her whispering with visitors. Sometimes it was with her sister Judy, other times with her best friend Patricia, or occasionally Richard, her lawyer from the teachers' union, who had helped with her will and medical directives. Whenever I would enter the room, they would smile weakly and change the subject. I assumed they were just trying to protect me from difficult end-of-life discussions, and I was too overwhelmed with grief and caregiving to press for details. The funeral was on a Thursday in October. The elementary school where Margaret had taught for 28 years closed for the day so her colleagues and former students could attend. The church overflowed with people whose lives she had touched, from grown adults who had been in her third-grade class decades ago to current students with hand-drawn cards. Daniel gave a brief eulogy recounting childhood memories of his mother's famous chocolate chip cookies and how she never missed a single soccer game. But throughout the service, I noticed something off about him. He checked his phone several times, seemed distracted during the pastor's words, and left the reception early, claiming Jessica, his wife of 3 years, was feeling unwell. Later that night, I sat alone in our empty house surrounded by flower arrangements and casserole dishes brought by well-meaning neighbors. The silence was deafening. For 3 decades, that house had been filled with Margaret's presence, her humming, while grading papers at the kitchen table, the smell of her gardenia lotion, the sound of her soft laughter at television shows. Now there was nothing but the ticking of the grandfather clock she had inherited from her parents, marking time in a world without her. 2 weeks after the funeral, Richard called to ask if I could come to his office to discuss some final matters regarding Margaret's estate. I assumed it was just paperwork, perhaps insurance policies or pension details from the school district. Margaret had always handled that side of things, organizing everything in neat folders in her home office. When I arrived at the small law office downtown, Richard offered me coffee and led me into a conference room rather than his usual office. That should have been my first clue that this was no ordinary meeting. "Travis, Margaret asked me to give you this after she passed," he said, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. Inside was a letter written in Margaret's neat penmanship, the same handwriting that had graded thousands of children's assignments over the years. "My dearest Travis," it began, "if you are reading this, then I have already left you, which breaks my heart. There is something I have kept from you, not out of deception, but as a surprise I had hoped to share in our retirement. Over the years I have purchased and maintained a small cottage on Crescent Lake, about 50 miles from our home. It was meant to be where we would spend our golden years together, watching sunsets and entertaining grandchildren." My hands trembled as I continued reading. "The cottage is fully paid for and in both our names. Richard has all the documentation and keys. I furnished it slowly, piece by piece, hoping to create a peaceful retreat for us after all your years of physical labor. I am so sorry I will not be there to see your face when you first walk through its doors, but know that every corner of it was designed with you in mind, with us in mind." I looked up at Richard, completely stunned. "Is this real, a whole house I did not know about?" Richard nodded. "Margaret purchased it initially, about 15 years ago, when it was little more than a run-down fishing cabin. She has been renovating it slowly ever since, mostly during those girls' weekends she would take a few times a year." The girls' weekends. 4 or 5 times annually, Margaret would pack a small bag and head off for what she called sanity breaks with Patricia and sometimes Judy. I had always encouraged these trips, knowing how hard she worked both at school and caring for our home. I never questioned where they went exactly, assuming it was to Patricia's timeshare or perhaps a rental cabin somewhere. To think she was actually working on our retirement home all those years, creating a surprise that would span decades. The property is worth approximately $350,000 in today's market, Richard continued. It is not extravagant, but it is on a nice piece of lakefront land that has appreciated considerably since she purchased it. All taxes and insurance are current. There is a small maintenance account set up as well. I felt as though I had stepped into someone else's life. How could Margaret have managed this without my knowledge? We told each other everything, or so I believed. Those weekends when I thought she was relaxing, she was actually working on another house. I asked, my voice rough with emotion. Richard's expression softened. She wanted to create something special, something that would be waiting for you both when the time was right. She was so proud of it, Travis. When she realized she wouldn't be able to share it with you in the way she had planned, she made me promise to make sure you found it after she was gone. The following weekend, I drove the 50 miles to Crescent Lake following Richard's directions. The roads narrowed as I left the highway, winding through dense pine forests, until the crystalline blue of the lake appeared between the trees. The GPS led me down a gravel road to a modest A-frame cottage painted a soft blue-gray with white trim. My heart pounded as I turned the key in the lock. Stepping inside was like walking into Margaret's mind. The open-concept living area had walls the color of sea glass with comfortable furniture arranged to maximize views of the lake. Built-in bookshelves held novels I knew were her favorites, along with board games we had enjoyed together early in our marriage. The small kitchen had the exact farmhouse sink she had always wanted, but we could never afford to put into our main home. On the refrigerator were magnets from places we had visited over the years, plus a few from destinations we had talked about seeing someday. Upstairs, the main bedroom had a large window seat where one could sit and watch the lake in all seasons. The guest room had clearly been set up with Daniel in mind, with space for a future family to visit. Every detail spoke of Margaret's thoughtfulness, her planning, her love. On the bedside table in the master bedroom, I found a leather-bound journal. Opening it, I recognized Margaret's handwriting immediately. April 15th, 2005. Closed on the lake property today. Travis would think I have lost my mind, spending our savings this way. But in 20 years, when we are ready to retire, this will be our haven. Today, it is just a shabby cabin with good bones, but I can already see what it will become. Entry after entry documented her vision for the place, her gradual purchases of furniture from second-hand stores that she would refinish herself, curtains she sewed during school breaks, repairs she learned to do by watching YouTube videos long after I had gone to bed. June 10th, 2010. Replaced the deck railing today. My hands are full of splinters, and I have a new appreciation for Travis's skills. Called a professional for the actual deck boards, but I stained them myself. Travis would have done this entire job in a weekend. It has taken me the entire summer. As the sun began to set over the lake, casting golden light across the water, I sat on that very deck, clutching Margaret's journal to my chest, tears flowing freely. This place was the embodiment of her belief in our future, a future she had worked toward in secret for years. A future she must have known in her final months that we would never share. I decided then not to tell Daniel about the lake house immediately. It was not that I wanted to keep it from him permanently, but rather that I needed time to process this connection to Margaret, to understand her gift fully before sharing it. With property values rising in Oregon, as they were, the cottage represented a significant asset, and I knew conversations about inheritance would inevitably follow any revelation. For now, this would be my sanctuary to grieve and heal, a place where Margaret's presence felt almost tangible in every thoughtful detail. When I returned home the following day, there were 3 missed calls from Daniel on my phone. This was unusual since we typically spoke only once a week since Margaret's passing. I returned his call that evening. "Dad, just checking on you," he said, his voice carrying that artificially bright tone people use when they are trying to sound casual but have an agenda. "Jessica and I were thinking of stopping by this weekend, maybe help you sort through some of Mom's things. It has been a few weeks now." Something in his phrasing made me uneasy. Margaret had only been gone 16 days, hardly time for her side of the closet to grow cold. "I am not ready for that yet, Daniel. But you and Jessica are welcome to visit. Just not to clear things out." His sigh was audible. "Dad, at some point you will need to start moving forward. Mom would not want you living in a museum." The comment stung, but I let it pass. Grief has no timeline, a lesson I was learning, hour by painful hour. Over the next 3 months, I noticed a distinct shift in Daniel's behavior. He and Jessica began visiting more frequently, always with thinly veiled suggestions about my living situation. "This place is really too big for just one person, Dad," he mentioned during a Sunday dinner in November, gesturing around our family dining room. "The property taxes alone must be brutal." "The house is paid off," I reminded him. "Your mother and I made the final mortgage payment the year you graduated college. Still, the maintenance, the utilities, on just your retirement income," he pressed. "Have you thought about downsizing? There are some nice condos near us in Seattle." I changed the subject, but the comments continued with each visit. Always framed as concern for my well-being, but with an underlying current I could not quite identify. In December, I discovered why. Daniel had lost his job at the marketing firm, where he had worked since completing his MBA. He dropped this information casually, as though it were a minor inconvenience rather than a significant life event. "The company is restructuring," he explained, picking at the lasagna Jessica had brought. "But it is actually perfect timing. Jessica and I have been talking about starting our own business." "What kind of business?" I asked, genuinely interested. They exchanged a quick glance before Daniel continued. "Consulting. For startup companies. We have the expertise, just need the capital." Jessica, usually talkative, seemed uncomfortable pushing food around her plate. "It is still in the planning stages," she added softly. Later, when Daniel stepped outside to take a phone call, Jessica helped me clear the dishes. "He is really struggling with losing his mom, and now this job situation," she confided. "He would never admit it, but he is scared." I felt a surge of paternal concern. "You know I would help if I could, Jessica. But most of our savings went to Margaret's treatments." She squeezed my arm. "No one expects you to solve this. Just maybe be patient with him. He is not always good at expressing what he really feels." I appreciated her honesty, but over the following weeks, Daniel's thinly veiled financial interest in my house became increasingly difficult to ignore. In January, during a particularly cold spell, the furnace in our family home needed repairs. When I mentioned this to Daniel on the phone, his response was immediate. "That settles it. You need to sell that money pit, Dad. Jessica and I have been looking at some assisted living communities that are really nice. Like resorts, practically. Daniel, I am 58 years old and in good health. I do not need assisted living. But why maintain a 3-bedroom house? It does not make sense financially." The conversation devolved from there into the first real argument we had had since Margaret's death. Daniel's tone became condescending, suggesting I was being stubborn out of sentimentality rather than practicality. When I remained firm, he ended the call abruptly. A week later, he arrived unannounced on a Saturday morning with real estate brochures. The glossy pages featured smiling seniors in communal dining rooms and game areas. None of them looked anywhere close to my age. "I am not selling my home," I stated firmly after he had launched into a rehearsed speech about amenities and community living. "Dad, be reasonable. This place is my inheritance anyway. Why not make use of its value now when it could benefit all of us?" The statement hit me like a physical blow. My inheritance. Not our family home, not the place where he had grown up and his mother had lived until her final days. Just an asset he was waiting to claim. "Your mother has been gone less than 4 months, Daniel. This is still our home." His expression hardened. "Mom is gone, Dad. And you are being selfish, holding on to a property that is too big for you just because you cannot move on." I asked him to leave. For the first time, I saw clearly how he viewed both me and his childhood home, not with emotional attachment, but with cold calculation of value. After he left, I found a business card that had fallen from his jacket pocket. It belonged to a real estate agent specializing in residential properties in our neighborhood. On the back was a handwritten note: "Can get $525K if we list by spring." That night I sat in Margaret's reading chair, surrounded by the life we had built together, and wondered what she would make of our son's behavior. Had she seen signs of this materialism before? Is that why she had kept the lake house separate, undisclosed? In February, I arrived home from grocery shopping to find Daniel and Jessica in my driveway. Jessica looked uncomfortable, but Daniel was animated, helping me with the bags, as though our previous argument had never happened. "Dad, we have got great news," he announced once we were inside. "Jessica and I are having dinner at Riverside Grill tonight, and we want you to join us. Our treat." The invitation seemed innocent enough, but something in Jessica's averted gaze made me wary. Still, I agreed. Perhaps this was an olive branch, an attempt to repair our strained relationship. The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place Margaret and I would have saved for major anniversaries. Daniel ordered an expensive bottle of wine and spent the first course chatting about neutral topics, sharing stories about colleagues and neighborhood gossip. It was not until after the main course that he pulled a folder from Jessica's handbag and placed it on the table between us. "Dad, we have been doing some research," he began, his voice taking on that overly patient tone that immediately put me on edge. "There are some excellent assisted living communities that have openings right now. We've toured 3 of them." Before I could object, he continued opening the folder to reveal brochures, pricing sheets, and most alarmingly legal documents. "This is a power of attorney form," he explained, sliding the papers toward me. "It would allow us to help manage your affairs, make this transition easier." "What transition?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Selling the house, moving you somewhere more appropriate for this stage of life." Jessica stared at her plate, clearly uncomfortable. When she finally looked up, her expression was apologetic, but she said nothing to contradict her husband. "Daniel, I have told you repeatedly that I am not selling my home. I am not incapable of making my own decisions or managing my own life." His facade of patience cracked. "Dad, be realistic. You're alone now. The house is too big. You cannot keep up with it. Mom would have wanted you to be practical." The mention of what Margaret would have wanted ignited something in me. "Do not presume to tell me what your mother would have wanted. She loved that house. We built our lives there. And now she is gone." Daniel's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. "That house is the only significant asset you have. It is my inheritance, and you are being selfish holding on to it when we could use that money now." There it was, the naked truth, stripped of all pretense of concern for my well-being. "We?" I asked quietly. Daniel's expression faltered momentarily before he regained his composure. "Yes, we. Jessica and I need capital for our business venture. With the housing market so strong right now, we could get top dollar for the property. And what about me? Where do I fit into this plan? You would be comfortable in assisted living, all your needs taken care of. I looked at the documents before me, then at my son's face. Where was the boy I had taught to ride a bike who had cried on my shoulder after losing the state championship in high school, who had hugged me tearfully at his college graduation and thanked Margaret and me for sacrificing so much for his education? I stood up, leaving the papers untouched. I will not be signing these, Daniel. Not now, not ever. Dad, you are not thinking clearly, he insisted, his voice taking on an edge I had never heard before. Since Mom died, you have been lost. This is for your own good. No, this is for your financial benefit. There is a difference. I placed my napkin on the table. I think this dinner is over. As I turned to leave, Daniel's mask slipped completely. That house is my inheritance. You are being selfish. The restaurant fell silent around us, other diners now openly staring. Jessica whispered his name urgently, trying to calm him, but he was beyond reason. I wasted enough of my youth caring for Mom when she was sick. He continued, the words cutting through me like physical blows. The least you can do is not be a burden too. I stood frozen, the cruel words hanging in the air between us. Without another word, I walked out of the restaurant into the cold February night, my heart heavier than it had been even in the darkest days after Margaret's death. In the parking lot, something fell from my jacket, a business card that had been tucked into my pocket without my knowledge. It was from another real estate agent, with a note in what appeared to be Daniel's handwriting. Call me directly when you are ready to list. Prearranged 3% commission. My son had not only planned to sell my home out from under me, but he had already been shopping for realtors negotiating commissions, all while I grieved the loss of my wife. That night alone in the house that held 30 years of memories, I wept for the first time since Margaret's funeral. Not just for her absence, but for the son I feared I had already lost as well. The next morning, I packed a small bag and drove to the lakeside cottage. I needed space to think away from the house that had suddenly become the center of such conflict. The winter sky was overcast, promising snow, and the lake was still partly frozen near the shore, but the cottage welcomed me with a warmth that had nothing to do with its heating system. Every corner reflected Margaret's thoughtful planning, from the well-stocked emergency supplies in the pantry to the woodpile on the covered porch, seasoned and ready for the fireplace. She had thought of everything, prepared for every contingency, just as she had done throughout our marriage. I built a fire and settled into the overstuffed chair positioned perfectly to watch both the flames and the lake view through the large windows. For the first time since her death, I felt Margaret's presence as a comfort, rather than an absence, as though she had created this space knowing someday I would need it as a sanctuary. On the second day of my retreat, I was clearing snow from the deck when I noticed an older couple doing the same at the neighboring cottage about 50 yards down the shoreline. The man waved, and soon they were making their way over through the snow. "You must be Travis," the woman said, extending a gloved hand. "I am Eleanor, and this is my husband, Frank. We were friends of Margaret's." The simple statement caught me off guard. These strangers knew, my wife knew about this place when I had been completely unaware of its existence until after her death. "Margaret mentioned you would be joining her in retirement," Frank added. "We were so sorry to hear of her passing. She was a wonderful neighbor during her visits." Over coffee in my kitchen, I learned how Margaret had befriended the retired teachers during her first summer at the lake. They had helped her with recommendations for local contractors, shared gardening tips for the rocky soil, and kept an eye on the property when she was away. "She talked about you constantly," Eleanor said warmly. "About your craftsmanship, how you could fix anything. She was so proud of the life you built together." "She spent every visit working on some project or another," Frank added. "Always with a vision of the days when you would be here together. The deck furniture she built herself after watching woodworking videos, Said she wanted to surprise you with skills that matched your own. The revelation struck me deeply. Margaret, who had always claimed to be hopeless with tools, had taught herself woodworking just to create something that would impress me. Did she ever mention our son? I asked, hesitantly. The couple exchanged a quick glance. She did, Eleanor answered carefully. She was very proud of his academic achievements. Their diplomatic response told me more than any direct answer could have. Margaret had seen the truth about Daniel long before I had allowed myself to acknowledge it. Over the following weeks, I found myself spending more time at the lake house than at our family home. I began working on small improvement projects, completing what Margaret had started. I replaced some worn deck boards, installed the ceiling fan she had purchased, but never mounted, painted the guest bathroom, the seafoam green color sample I found taped to the mirror. Each project connected me to Margaret in a new way, helping me understand her vision for our future. In her journal, I found sketches for a vegetable garden she had planned for the side yard, with notes about my favorite varieties of tomatoes and peppers. I began preparing the soil, following her detailed instructions. Frank and Eleanor introduced me to other neighbors, mostly retirees who lived at the lake year-round. I joined their monthly poker night, helped with a community dock repair project, attended a potluck dinner where I was welcomed without question. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt something besides grief, a tentative sense of belonging and purpose. Meanwhile, Daniel's messages became increasingly frequent and insistent. I returned to the family home every few days to check mail and maintain the property, often finding voicemails demanding I call him back immediately. When I did, the conversations followed the same pattern. His thinly veiled demands about selling the house met with my firm refusals. "Dad, you have been disappearing for days at a time," he accused during one particularly tense call in late March. "The neighbors are concerned. Mrs. Abernathy said your car was gone all last week." "I am taking short trips," I replied vaguely. "It is good for me to get out of the house." "Where are you going? Who are you with?" His tone was less concerned than suspicious, as though I might be squandering his perceived inheritance. "I am a grown man, Daniel. I do not need to report my whereabouts." His frustration was palpable even through the phone. "This is exactly why we need to discuss assisted living. You are not making rational decisions." I ended the call unsettled by his growing sense of entitlement to control my life. That evening, I began quietly moving personal items to the Lake House family photo albums, Margaret's jewelry box, the quilt her grandmother had made for our wedding. Not emptying the family home, but transferring our most precious memories to the sanctuary Margaret had created. As spring arrived, bringing new growth around the lake, I felt a parallel renewal in my own spirit. I planted Margaret's garden, built a small dock extension based on plans in her journal, and even adopted an older golden retriever named Max from the local shelter. Margaret had noted in her journal that a dog would complete our retirement picture, and Max's gentle companionship filled a void I had not fully acknowledged. During this time, I consulted with Richard about my legal options. As I suspected, the house belonged solely to me now, and Daniel had no legal claim to it while I was alive and mentally competent. However, Richard advised documenting my cognitive health with my doctor, given Daniel's concerning comments about my decision-making abilities. Some adult children pursue guardianship when elderly parents will not comply with their wishes, Richard explained during a visit to his office. It is rare when the parent is clearly competent, but not unheard of. He would try to declare me incompetent just to get control of the house. The idea seemed outlandish, yet based on Daniel's recent behavior, not entirely implausible. Let us hope it does not come to that. But we should be prepared. Following Richard's advice, I underwent a cognitive assessment with my longtime physician, who documented my excellent mental health in detail. I also updated my will with Richard's help, making some significant changes that felt right given recent events. By early summer, I had established a comfortable rhythm between my two homes. The family house remained mostly intact, but the lake cottage had become my true residence, the place where I felt most at peace. I had not yet told Daniel about its existence, a decision that weighed on me occasionally, but felt necessary given his fixation on my assets. That protective instinct proved justified in early June, 9 months after Margaret's passing. I had returned to the family home to tend the yard and retrieve more books when Daniel's car pulled into the driveway unexpectedly. He was alone, dressed in business attire I had not seen him wear since losing his job carrying a leather portfolio. "Dad, we need to talk," he announced, brushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. I have been patient, but this has gone on long enough. In the living room, he opened his portfolio and removed a stack of documents far thicker than those he had presented at the restaurant months earlier. "I have consulted with an attorney specializing in elder care." He began, his tone formal and rehearsed. "These papers establish a care plan for you, including the sale of this property and relocation to Sunny Pines Senior Community." I remained standing while he sat and spread the papers across the coffee table Margaret had refinished just before her diagnosis. "And if I refuse to sign?" Daniel's expression hardened. "Then I will petition the court for guardianship. I have documented your erratic behavior, your disappearances, your refusal to discuss reasonable financial planning." Erratic behavior? You mean grieving my wife of 32 years, taking some time alone to process that loss? "You are not coping well, Dad. The neighbors have noticed. Mrs. Abernathy said you sometimes leave for a week at a time. Your mail piles up. You have lost weight. So concern from a nosy neighbor and my changing physique are grounds for declaring me incompetent." Daniel had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable but pressed on. "It is not just that. You are making irrational decisions about your largest asset. This house is worth over $500,000, yet you live here alone, rattling around in all this space while refusing to even discuss downsizing." I studied my son's face, searching for any trace of the boy we had raised, the one who had once shown such compassion when a neighbor's dog was hit by a car that he had organized a neighborhood funeral, the teenager who had spent an entire summer building a wheelchair ramp for his English teacher after a car accident. When had that person been replaced by this stranger focused solely on his financial gain? "Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." I sat down across from him, looking directly into eyes so like his mother's, yet lacking her warmth. "Is this truly about concern for my well-being, or is it about getting your hands on the value of this house?" For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of shame cross his features, quickly replaced by defensiveness. "It is about being practical. You are living in the past, holding on to a house that is now mostly an empty museum to Mom. Meanwhile, Jessica and I have put our business plans on hold because we cannot access capital that is just sitting here unused." "Unused? This is my home." "It is an inefficient use of resources." His composure cracked. "Do you have any idea what Jessica and I could do with the equity in this property? We have a business plan that could triple that investment in 5 years. So I should give up my home so you can gamble with its value on a startup business?" Daniel's expression turned ugly. "I gave up 2 years of my career to help when Mom was sick. I put my life on hold commuting from Seattle every weekend. I deserve something for that." The statement stunned me into momentary silence. Those weekends he had so reluctantly spent helping during Margaret's illness, the bare minimum support a son might offer his dying mother, were now being tallied as a debt I was expected to repay. "Your mother fought for her life for 3 years," I said quietly. "She taught her classes until she physically could not stand anymore. Even then, she tutored students from her hospital bed. She never once spoke of what she deserved or was owed for her suffering. "That is different," Daniel insisted. "Is it your mother and I worked extra jobs for years to put you through college and graduate school? We never took vacations. We drove the same cars until they practically fell apart. We did all that gladly as parents who wanted the best for their child. We never once considered it a debt you needed to repay." Daniel looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "The business opportunity Jessica and I have will not wait forever. We need capital now. And that justifies trying to declare your own father incompetent, forcing him from his home." When Daniel looked back at me, his expression had hardened again. "If you would just be reasonable, it would not have to go that far. Sign the papers, Dad. Let us sell this place and move you somewhere appropriate." I gathered the documents from the table, stood up, and handed them back to him. "No, Daniel, I will not be signing these. And if you pursue guardianship, you should know I have already had a full cognitive assessment with Dr. Miller. I have also consulted with a lawyer about these tactics." Surprise and frustration flashed across his face. "You have been talking to lawyers behind my back?" "I have been protecting myself, which apparently is necessary even from my own son." Daniel stuffed the papers back into his portfolio, his movements sharp with anger. "You will regret this, Dad. One way or another, this house will be sold. It is just a question of whether you cooperate or make things difficult for everyone." "By everyone, you mean yourself and Jessica." He stood towering over me with an intimidating posture I had never seen from him before. "Jessica is pregnant. Did I mention that your grandchild will be born in December? Think about that while you are being stubborn about this house." The news, which should have been joyous, delivered as a manipulation tactic, was the final straw. Any doubt I had about my decisions regarding Daniel evaporated in that moment. "Congratulations," I said flatly. "I hope you will be as dedicated to your child's well-being as your mother and I were to yours. Now I think you should leave." "This is not over, Dad," he warned as he moved toward the door. "You will hear from my lawyer." After he left, I sat in Margaret's reading chair, processing the encounter. The son we had sacrificed everything for had just threatened legal action to strip me of my home and autonomy, using his unborn child as emotional leverage. The pain was almost physical, a crushing weight on my chest. That evening, I called Richard and recounted the confrontation. He advised me to document everything and assured me that Daniel's case for guardianship was extremely weak, given my documented mental competence. However, he warned that even frivolous legal actions could be stressful and expensive. "There is something else you should know," I told Richard. "Daniel mentioned that Jessica is pregnant. They are expecting a child in December." Richard was silent for a moment. "That adds a layer of complexity emotionally, if not legally. Does this change how you want to proceed with your estate planning?" I thought about the grandchild who would be born into this conflict, an innocent party to adult greed and manipulation. "No, but I want to make sure that child is provided for directly, not through Daniel. Can we add a trust of some kind?" "We certainly can. Come by tomorrow and we will discuss the options." That night at the lake house, with Max snoring gently at my feet, I made a difficult but necessary decision. It was time to sell the family home, but on my terms, not Daniel's. 1 year after Margaret's death, I had fully transitioned to living at the lake cottage. Max and I had settled into a comfortable routine: morning walks along the shore, coffee with Frank and Eleanor, most afternoons volunteer work at the local elementary school, helping with their maintenance needs, a small nod to Margaret's teaching legacy. The family home had been sold 2 months earlier, but not as Daniel had planned. Working with Richard, I had found a young couple, both teachers like Margaret, who had fallen in love with the house but could barely afford the market rate. I had offered them a significant discount with a special clause in the contract, requiring them to maintain the garden Margaret had loved for at least 5 years. The sale had still netted a substantial sum, though less than what Daniel had anticipated. I had immediately placed a portion of it into a trust for my unborn grandchild's education, with Richard serving as trustee. The remainder was divided between a scholarship fund in Margaret's name at her elementary school and my own retirement needs. Daniel, of course, had been furious when informed of the sale after it was completed. His threats of legal action had fizzled when Richard calmly explained that I had every right to sell my own property and disperse the proceeds as I saw fit. However, the final confrontation came when Daniel discovered the existence of the lake house. It happened inadvertently. Jessica had reached out to me directly, something she rarely did, asking if we could meet without Daniel. Concerned, I agreed to see her at a cafe halfway between Seattle and the lake. When she arrived, her pregnancy was clearly visible, her face tired but determined. "Travis, I owe you an apology," she began after ordering herbal tea. "I should have spoken up months ago about what Daniel was doing. You were in a difficult position." I offered, genuinely sympathetic to her situation. "That is no excuse. The way he has treated you after everything you and Margaret did for him." She twisted her wedding band nervously. "Things between us are not good. I have told him I will not be part of taking legal action against you, and he is furious." We talked for nearly an hour. Jessica revealed that Daniel's business venture was far riskier than he had admitted, essentially a scheme to flip luxury properties with borrowed money, something neither of them had any experience with. Their financial situation was dire, with credit card debt mounting since his job loss. "I just wanted you to know that I am sorry and that I am taking steps to distance myself from his actions," she concluded. "The baby deserves better than what I have seen from Daniel lately." As we parted, I made a spontaneous decision. "Jessica, there is something I want to show you. Would you follow me in your car? It is about 30 minutes from here." Her curiosity piqued, she agreed. I led her to the lake cottage, watching her expression of wonder as we pulled up to the property. "This is beautiful," she gasped as we walked toward the deck overlooking the water. "Is this a rental?" "No, it belongs to me. Or rather, it belonged to Margaret and me. She purchased and maintained it in secret for years, planning it as our retirement home." Jessica's eyes widened as the implications set in. "Daniel does not know about this place, does he?" "No. Given his attitude about the family home, I thought it best to keep this separate." We sat on the deck watching ducks paddle near the shore while I explained the story of the cottage. Jessica listened intently, occasionally wiping away tears. "Margaret was incredible," she said finally. "To plan this for so many years, always thinking of your future together." "She was," I agreed. "Always thinking ahead, always caring for others." When Jessica left that afternoon, she hugged me tightly. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I will not tell Daniel, not until things are more settled between us." However, that decision was taken out of her hands. Daniel, suspicious of her meeting with me, had followed her at a distance. As she pulled away from the cottage, he pulled in, storming up to the deck where I still sat. "What the hell is this place?" he demanded, looking around at the obvious signs of permanent residence: Max's bed on the porch, my truck in the carport garden, tools leaning against the shed. "This is my home," I replied calmly, standing to face him. "Since when? Where did this come from?" His face flushed with anger as he peered through the windows at the comfortable interior. "Your mother bought it years ago as a surprise for our retirement. I learned about it after she died." Daniel's expression transformed as he processed this information, shock giving way to calculation as he mentally assessed the property's value. Another house all this time, and you sold our family home for less than market value while hiding this asset. I was not hiding it, Daniel. I simply did not share it with you given your expressed interest in liquidating my assets for your benefit. He paced the deck, running numbers in his head. This has to be worth at least $300,000, maybe more, with lakefront access. Why was this not disclosed during estate planning? Because it was already in both our names. It transferred directly to me upon your mother's death. There was nothing to disclose. Daniel stopped pacing, his face hardening. You have been playing me for a fool, living here in luxury while pretending you could not help with our financial situation. This is hardly luxury, Daniel. It is a modest retirement cottage, exactly what your mother and I worked our entire lives to achieve. Well, now that I know about it, we need to discuss how this property factors into my inheritance and current financial needs. The entitlement in his tone, the automatic assumption that this too was somehow his due, confirmed every instinct I had had about keeping the cottage private. There is nothing to discuss, I said firmly. This property is my home, purchased with your mother's savings and maintained by her for decades. It is not available for your business schemes. Daniel's face contorted with rage. First you undersell the family home, now you are hoarding another property, while Jessica and I struggle. While your grandchild's future hangs in the balance, you are being selfish and spiteful. Daniel, I have already established a trust fund for your child's education, with proceeds from the house sale. I have taken care of my grandchild's future directly. This news, rather than reassuring him, only inflamed his anger further. A trust controlled by who? So now you are trying to control how we raise our child, too. The trust is for education only, managed by Richard, to ensure that is how the funds are used. Richard, Daniel spat the name. Mom's lawyer, so you have both been conspiring behind my back. This is elder manipulation. Richard has clearly taken advantage of your grief to turn you against your own son. The accusation was so absurd, so completely backward from the reality of who had been trying to manipulate whom, that I almost laughed, despite the seriousness of the situation. Daniel, I think you should leave. When you are calmer, we can discuss the educational trust for your child. But this property is not up for discussion now or ever. This is not over. He threatened, the same words he had used in our last confrontation. If you think you can hide assets and play favorites with my child, you are mistaken. After he stormed off, I called Richard immediately to warn him about Daniel's accusations and likely next moves. Richard assured me that everything we had done was legally sound, and that Daniel had no grounds for challenging either the property ownership or the educational trust. In the following weeks, Daniel made good on his threats, filing a lawsuit claiming undue influence and demanding a financial review of Margaret's estate. The case was quickly dismissed by the court, but not before causing significant stress and legal expenses. Daniel then attempted to challenge my mental competence, a move that failed spectacularly, given the thorough documentation my doctor had already compiled. Throughout this difficult period, I found solace in the lake community that had embraced me. Frank and Eleanor brought casseroles during the worst days of legal stress. The elementary school where I volunteered held a surprise appreciation dinner when the lawsuit was finally dismissed. Max's loyal companionship kept loneliness at bay, his gentle presence a daily comfort. 3 months after discovering the lake house, Jessica left Daniel, moving temporarily to her parents' home in Oregon to prepare for the baby's arrival. She reached out to me cautiously, uncertain of her place in the family, given the ongoing conflict. I assured her that my door would always be open to her and my grandchild, regardless of her relationship with Daniel. When Jessica gave birth to a daughter in December, she named her Margaret, a gesture that brought tears to my eyes when she called to tell me. I visited them in the hospital, holding tiny Margaret, with a heart full of complex emotions. Joy for this new life mixed with sadness that my Margaret would never meet her namesake. Daniel was noticeably absent during my visit, having apparently left the hospital shortly after the birth due to a business obligation. Jessica's expression when she mentioned this told me everything I needed to know about the state of their marriage. By spring, Jessica had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. She moved with baby Margaret to a small apartment near her workplace, determined to support herself independently. I kept my distance from the legal proceedings, but made it clear to Jessica that she and the baby would always be welcome at the lake cottage. Daniel made no further attempts to contact me after his legal challenges failed his pride, apparently too wounded to attempt reconciliation. I sent birthday and Christmas cards, always including updated information about the educational trust established for his daughter, but received no response. As for me, the lakeside community became my true home. I expanded Margaret's garden, built a small workshop where I created furniture for neighbors and toys for the local elementary school. Max and I walked the lakeshore every morning and evening, our ritual unchanged through seasons of snow, rain, and sunshine. On quiet evenings, I often sat on the deck with Margaret's journal reading entries from years past, adding my own occasionally to document this unexpected chapter of life. In its pages, I found both solace and wisdom, particularly in one entry from shortly before her diagnosis. The true measure of wealth is not in what we accumulate, but in the love we nurture and the peace we create. Travis and I may never be rich in dollars, but we have built a fortune in moments. That is the inheritance I hope we leave Daniel, far more valuable than any property or possession. Margaret knew that love does not always protect us from betrayal, but it can give us a place to heal afterward. Her final gift was not just this house, it was the chance to rebuild my life with dignity after seeing the truth. Sometimes silence is the greatest protection against those who would take advantage of our vulnerability. And sometimes the family we choose creates more healing than the family we are born with. If you have ever had to make difficult decisions to protect yourself from family members who showed their true colors, let me know in the comments below. Has keeping certain information to yourself ever protected you from someone's greed?